Welcome everybody to the Shared Lives Plus UK conference. Welcome back if you were joining us as one of our members in the morning, listening to people talk about their real life experiences of shared lives, home share and family by family. We had the Minister of State joining us, and we kicked off the event with a really inspiring and provoking session from Mike Clark on equalities, diversity and inclusion, which was fantastic. You have also heard from our colleagues on Family by Family, our new initiative that we're working with Australian colleagues on, and you'll have had a workshop as well. But in this session, we're joined by about 170 people from all over who aren't necessarily directly involved with Shared Lives Plus's work, but share our passion for communities, for inclusion and equality. And one of the pleasures of being in this role, which many of you will know I'm moving on from at the end of the year after over 11 years with Shared Lives Plus, and one of the real pleasures and the privileges is constantly learning from people about what makes a good life, and meeting people who are pursuing a good life for them and for the people around them in ways which are incredibly brave, creative, and generous. And so often if you're involved in debates about public services or charities or government, we hear so much talk about what we can't do, what we can't have, and the difficult choices that people with power and control over public money have to make on our behalf. But in this session, we're joined by people who have a focus on what we can do, on what's possible, what we can have, and how we can stop asking people, particularly people who need support at different times in their lives, to choose between getting the help they need and living life as fully as we would all wish to. A lot of our work and our members' work at Shared Lives Plus happens at the outer edges of what we'd recognise as public services, and also where those services and those forms of support meet people who themselves find themselves too often at the outer edges of our communities. And I think we've all had some of that experience during the pandemic, some of us much more than others, of course, but we've all experienced being excluded in different ways. Many of us have experienced loss. So this session, we want to think about what kinds of communities and connections do we want to emerge from that time of isolation? What should we be trying to find after all of the things that we may have lost during the last couple of years? And how can we ensure that the communities that we're building are much more inclusive, much more equitable, much more fair than the very imperfect communities that we were living in going into the pandemic? And our panel bring lots of different kinds of experience and expertise to that debate, but they all share that interest in connection, community and equality. So I'm going to come to Heather Thompson first, who is my colleague here at Shared Lives Plus, working as one of our ambassadors, helping us to improve shared lives and also to talk about it publicly. Heather, you live in Scotland with a Shared Lives carer, and you came to that arrangement as a teenager, sort of wondering what to do with your life. Do you just want to start by telling us a little bit about who you live with and how that household works for you?
Absolutely. I'd just like to say hello to everybody that's came today. Thank you very much. So I came to Shared Lives when I was 18, and before that I was in a foster care placement from the age of 16. Previous to that, I've been in foster care from a very young age, but I was very lucky to be placed with a family until I was 16. Between 16 and 18, I was unfortunately moved because I went from family fostering into adult fostering. And that was quite a scary time for me, because the age of 16 to 18, you are placed into your own house. And a lot of us at that age are not ready to move into our own house and to be able to be given that support. And it was very luckily that my social worker, Sarah, managed to hear it from someone that she went to a meeting, and she thought that would be perfect for Heather. So after she came back and told me about Shared Lives, I was like, that sounds perfect. I went to meet my shared lives family the next week, and we just clicked. I'm the eldest of 5, which keeps me on my toes a lot of the time. I stay with my shared lives carer called Andrea, and I don't see her like a carer. I see her like a mum figure to me. She's gave me independence. She's gave me confidence to go out there to the world, and the families gave me more of a relaxing feeling to myself. I feel more confident to be able to speak up for what's right in my life and be the person I am today.
Fantastic, and it sounds like you contribute quite a lot to that household yourself. You said particularly to the other young people in that household.
Yes, I'm their big sister, so in a way, because I'm the eldest, it's a lot of responsibility sometimes, but also it's a lot of fun as well. You know, not everything's professional, done by the book. There is days where belly laughing or we're, you know, having a wee squabble, but I think that's just families and siblings, really.
And you've used that kind of stable base and that sense of belonging to start helping other people in the community as well. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, absolutely. So me and a group called the New Beginnings Group, who are all supported by Cornerstone, decided about 2 years ago that we wanted to set up a cafe. And we decided to do this because all of us have had in our lives people telling us we can't do something, and we wanted to prove that label wrong. So to begin with, we decided where we were going to set up the cafe, but more importantly, where we could bring the community in, because no one should be ever judged by the way that they are. So my main job is to bake the cakes, and the other jobs everybody else does is around everything that we do in the cafe. Everything is up to us. We just need that wee bit more support to be able for us to do it. And when we first opened the cafe and we got people in and they understood and they read about what Shared Lives was and what the community was, they absolutely loved it. And at first it was scary because you're putting yourself out. You're ready for that judgment of people labelling you and seeing you for the first time. But 2 years later on, we wouldn't change it for the world.
Fantastic, thanks Heather. I'm sure we'll come back to that story. Rick and Gretta, you live in a home share arrangement. Do you want to just tell us a little bit about how that works and how you came to be living together?
Yes, well, about 2.5, 3 months ago, I was walking down the drive to go out to drinks and I fell flat on my face, and I didn't break any bones, but it made me realise what was I going to do with the rest of my life. I've just celebrated my 90th birthday, and my need was to stay in my own home. So I have a daughter who lives in Sussex and a son abroad. So I went to look at local homes, but they weren't for me. So I then found, friends of mine found Home Share, 2 generations, and Lisa Goebel, I contacted her and she contacted me, and that's where the story with Rick begins.
Yeah. Fantastic. And yeah, go on, Rick. What's home sharing been like for you?
Well, it's been fantastic. My need was to find an alternative accommodation, and I had been renting a room down in Chichester before lockdown, which I gave up.
Christian, and I do believe I have been blessed.
Thanks. Brilliant. That's really lovely to hear. I can see that there may be some sound issues. I can hear everybody, but Phoebe's telling me that some of our audience may have lost sound. So we're just going to pause. Yeah, I can see there's a temporary loss of sound there. So I think in a moment, Jeremy is going to tell us when we've got sound back up again. Sound back. Fantastic. So I hope that people managed to catch some of Rick and Gretta's story. I'm not sure how long we'd lost sound for. Phoebe's going to just tell me now, but we were Yeah, so we did, I think we lost Rick's sound. So Rick, without asking you, people heard that you'd been matched with Gretta. I guess it would be great just to hear what is it that sort of makes home share different to renting a room from somebody?
Well, it's exactly just as the term home share implies. You're actually part of the home. I feel like it's my home as well as Gretta's, and we've agreed to do that. It's a lot more than just a rental where you come and go as you don't really belong. Yeah, I've got a sense of belonging now.
And you contribute to each other's sort of. You were saying before that you it sounds like you really like to cook, so you do lots of the cooking, and you've kind of found as it's gone on. Sorry, Gretta, go on.
Well, Rick does all the cooking. I mean, obviously, I once was part of a family with 3 children, and we used to have students from abroad, so I used to cook a lot. But I've been on my own for 25 years, so the joy of having someone in the house and helping me or doing the cooking and the gardening, and we have a great interest in the garden together, which is lovely. And it is a partnership.
Brilliant, thank you.
The big thing, I think, from my point, is that Gretta has the feeling of security that she knows if I go out and play bridge in the evenings at a bridge club, that I'm coming home again, and she's got somebody in the home that if something happens to her, she's got somebody to call, and I'll be around. I can always give her a hand with whatever it is. I'm not a carer, no. But it's effectively taking that's just giving that reassurance. Yeah. I think should things get to that where Gretta actually needs a carer, then it's a whole different ball game, and of course we'll take it to a different level. Her family would have to be involved in. For now, she's really able to enjoy her full life at home. I'm enjoying being a part of the home as well, and it's wonderful.
I've played a lot of sport in my life. I've played cricket for my county, squash for my county, squash for 46 years, umpired at Wimbledon, so I'm fairly fit.
Got sworn at by John McEnroe.
That is a story we definitely need to hear more of at some point. So thank you and thank you. It's really lovely to hear sort of how that's working, and also sort of that sort of way that you've sort of built this unusual shared household around what works for you both. So that's brilliant. And Georgie, your work is all about it's about connections, but particularly connections between people from different generations, which I think, so do you want to just tell us a bit about why that's your passion and where you've seen those connections being rebuilt in different places?
Absolutely. I have to say, I mean, really, I could listen to you 3 all day. Absolutely, truly, really wonderful. So yeah, so I'm a designer, and my big passion is how, and also being very, very selfish. I was interested in how we can live longer and healthier. And so I've been working in this sort of like the age arena for about 7 years, thinking about how we can redesign products and services and places to live around that. And the thing which became very, very clear to me very, very quickly, that this was all about intergenerational connection. It was really about that community, and I'm just gonna, if I can, I'd like to sort of like tell you a bit of a story which absolutely blew my mind about 5 years ago, and we have to go back to the sort of like 1870s in America, where there was a little town called Roseto, where a whole load of Italian immigrants set up a town. It became very, very famous in the 1950s in America because it was the only place in the whole of the US where no one under the age of 50 had died of heart disease. So loads of people, researchers, academics, TV, everyone descended on Roseto, and they wanted to see, was it their diet? No, I mean, yes, I mean, you know, they were eating fairly well, but actually there was a lot of sort of like chips and burgers going on. Was it their lifestyle? No, lots of drinking, lots of smoking. Was it what they were doing? Lots of the men were working in sort of like in factories and sort of, you know, really tough kind of jobs. very, very quickly it became clear the thing which was helping people live longer and healthier and happier was the sense of community. These were sort of intergenerational houses. People were going in the houses all the time. The men were working together. The women were sort of, when they were not working, they were sort of like, they were spending time with each other. Then something happened. In the 1980s, the first case of someone under 50 having a heart disease, because what had happened, the community had started to shift. People were moving out of intergenerational homes. People were looking for bigger houses, bigger gardens, bigger commutes. The community started to break down, and very quickly the level of disease within that community was the same as everyone else. That became such a powerful story for me. Community is so much more important than physicians, so much more important than hospitals and clinics. I mean, I know that sounds like quite extreme thing to say, but actually, if we really build in, and we want it across all ages, deep connections, then actually that helps us live longer and healthier. So for me, the passion is very much about how can we build strong communities along shared values across all ages, which help us all live longer, healthier, and more importantly, joyfully. So.
Fantastic. Thanks, Georgina. I love, yeah, absolutely. Let's bring words like joyful back into discussion about what we want, because it's often missing from the kind of debates that people have about what kind of communities we want and what kind of public services we want. Clinton, we've known each other probably for the best part of 10 years now, I think. And in that time, you've developed your voice as an activist and as an expert, and you lead the Think Local Act Personal partnership, which we mentioned in the introduction, which is about well, I think it's, to start off with, it was very much focused about better social care and more personalised social care and individual choice and control. As that partnership's kind of gone on, that the idea of community, as Georgie says, being actually as important, if not more important, has really been more and more of a strand of that work. And it's well worth people checking out Think Local Act Personal's website, seeing examples of people doing things very differently and building their communities. But an idea which you have spoken about a lot, Clinton, I've certainly heard you talk about a lot, is the idea that people who have their own experiences of using support services, or sometimes not being able to get support services when they need them, have a unique expertise in terms of not just developing better services, but also actually developing better communities. So would you like to say something about your passion, which, you know, for co-production and for equality?
Thank you, Alex. For me, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Alex. For me, this comes under the foundation of contribution that we need to build in communities, and using our gifts and skills. And I think contribution is one of the last human needs. And I believe there's the 6 human needs are, as people, we need 1, certainty; 2, variation; 3, significancy; 4, love and connection; and 5, growth. And this leaves us with contribution, which goes hand in hand with the need for growth. And we usually satisfy our need for growth and contribution last. And after we have found ways of dealing with the other 4 basic needs, unlike some of the other needs, growth and contribution are not in conflict with each other. They do not need to be in balance, but rather more we have one, and the more we have of the other. So contribution to me is really important, and it's any act or intention to act that improves that position of others, and that can be physical improvement or emotional improvement, but also if the interactions that we have are made other person feel better, even in a small way, you have contributed to someone else's life, and that's the experience that I've had, and contributing feels good, and sometimes we forget that, and whenever we give, it helps us think highly of ourselves, and that's the experience that I've found for myself. And sometimes when we give, we learn to appreciate what we have, and I think that's been a big case in the pandemic, and giving us also a wonderful way fills a few of us of the other needs that I talked about. But obviously, we would not be able to give anything if we didn't not think we had something to give. And it can also give us a sense of variation if we help and contribute to different people. So those are some of the things that I hold dear, and having the skills and knowledge that we can help people in that way and receive something in return, not necessarily monetary value, but this is where those why random acts of kindness can play a major part, and it's a great way to feel we are contributing to the world around us. But it's how equity comes along to you are able to use your power in forming relationships, use your power to inform decision making, and your power to shape the environment around you. And I think those are really important. And contribution for me, I'm a parent. I've got a daughter, and parenting for me is the best way to shape our society. Sometimes we forget that, and that shaping that society shapes community for me. And if we invest in parenting, we invest in social change and making the world a better place for us and for our generations to come. And that's what my mum and dad and our community around me, living in Birmingham, Balsall Heath, which has it's one of the poorest areas in Birmingham growing up. But my mum and dad had a saying: if you're going to raise your children to feel that you can accomplish any goal or task they decide upon, you will have succeeded as a parent, and you will have given your child the greatest gift. And I believe my parents have done that to my 7 siblings. And the saying they always used to say was, it takes a village, to raise a child. And it's an African proverb that means basically that an entire community of people must provide for and interact positively with children, for those children to experience and grow in a safe and healthy environment. That's no different to adults for me, and it's I like the term joy. Vitality for me is part of that, and belonging, and how we use our imagination to turn that into action. So for me, when I'm talking about co-production, everyone says to me, what it means to me is working together and learning together. That's what co-production means, basically. And that has to have meaning, purpose, human connections, and forming relationships. That's all part of co-production for me. And the thing that worries me is for co-production hasn't included everyone. Often co-production is undertaken with those who engage and to and really change things, we need to reach all parts of our diverse communities for that engagement to address social issues more fully.
Thanks, Clinton. There's as ever, there's about 100 really rich ideas in there that I'd like to pursue in more detail. And I think there's some themes coming out as well, particularly this theme about joy that's coming out, but that idea of contributing as being a right as well as a responsibility. And I think there are some things in here about power and who gets to take responsibility and to have that power, as well as that health giving aspect of which we all want to feel useful and to feel like we're useful to those around us and we have something to contribute. Cormac, lots there to which I think no chimes with your work. You work internationally in asset-based community development, one of the leading voices in that field. What would you like to pick up on from what you've heard so far and from your work?
One of the things I found stirring up in me was just reflecting back to why I got into this work. And I always feel this work is very autobiographical, you know, it's kind of like it's our story rather than here's a professional over here that's doing it one way and here's people with lived experience doing it another. So I started my own personal life in an orphanage. So for the first 2 years of my life, I was, in an orphanage in Ireland. Which is quite a long time. Typically, if you're not adopted pretty early when you're a baby and everybody coos and caws, you're in trouble. But fortunately enough, this is my first shared life experience, where somebody in the community, namely my adopted mother and father, reached out and said, we'll share our life with Cormac, and subsequently with my brother Kevin, who somebody who in many respects now that mom and dad are dead, is living at home independently with an intellectual disability, but with a huge bundle of gifts and relationships that enable that to happen. And kind of in between here, where I am now, and that first experience of coming into adoption and coming into community life, I then went, after growing up, I went into working in residential childcare, and it was really interesting because I think I was told I was working with kids in care, and I very quickly woke up to the fact that the one thing they didn't have was care. They had people who were paid to look after them, who were caring people, but kept moving every 2-3 months. Maybe the longest stayed for 2.5 years. And even though we had taken them out of very big institutions and we'd put them into places, into neighborhoods, they didn't know anybody in the neighborhood. They weren't in any way rooted in the neighborhood. I remember speaking to a 5-year-old once in one of these places, these community care homes. And the child said, the judge took me from my mother, took me from my community, and put me in this place where only people who are paid to care. But you always go. So to me, I think one of the other functions of community is we suffer. So as well as creating joy, we create a way that we make meaning of suffering. I buried both my mother and father during this pandemic and wasn't able to be physically at my mother's funeral. That's suffering. And I think we do suffering as well as joy together, actually. And it's the whole gambit of life experience. So for me, care is something that's really, really complex. It comes from culture, it comes from family, it comes from surprising places, and it comes sometimes in paid bundles, and often it comes as the freely given gift of the heart. And I guess what I'm constantly curious about, because my birth mother came from a community that said, we do not care enough about your pregnancy to embrace you. So we're going to shame you to give your child away. So that was a community that did that and caused suffering and alienated her. And then another community that embraced. So there's a lot of complex tension which we need to kind of work through. And yet in all of that, there's the giftedness of families who are prepared to create a place of welcome for the stranger. And that's what kind of lights me up and gives me joy.
Second time I've done that today. Muted myself and forgot to unmute. Thanks, Cormac. That was really powerful and wove together lots of threads. I was struck by about how natural it kind of seems to us, particularly if we've been sort of immersed in public services, that people would be asked to use or to live in services which in lots of ways just don't have any of those natural goods that you're talking about, or struggle to have them within a more clinical or institutional environment. And we see some of the things that we've heard about this afternoon, and also sort of earlier in the day, in terms of people sharing their homes in unusual ways, sharing their lives together. That seems like the thing that's odd, whereas really it's in many ways it's the thing that's natural. But we had a question related to that, a kind of which was a question for Gretta from one of the audience, which was, Gretta, what did your kind of family and your nearest and dearest sort of think about you home sharing in this way? Were they nervous about it, or did they embrace it?
Well, initially I invited a friend to come and meet Rick, because my daughter lives in Sussex, and so Jenny came and met Rick in my home, and then Jane came for the weekend and met Rick, and then my son in America Zoomed and spoke to us on Zoom, and so the pressures of my daughter. She doesn't have to worry about me anymore, though I do speak to her every day. And obviously she's met Rick, and I recently had a birthday party, and all my friends came, and she came, and Rick came, so everybody got to know everybody.
Yeah, there is a screening process. So I've been DBS cleared and credit cleared and everything. So it's not as though it's a blind thing. And the Two Generations company take responsibility for that. And I saw there was another question that came up, that should anything happen to Gretta and she should have to go into a home, that was, if I'm preempting it, please tell me, but I think that was the next question. It was related to it as well. Should anything happen to Gretta in the future, then yes, Two Generations have the responsibility to find me an alternate home share arrangement, so it's part of the contractual agreement.
So I think thank you, and I think something that our members, and I think other kinds of services that are trying to work in this way, which is focusing on capacity and potential and assets, have to wrestle with, is how much structure do you put around these arrangements? How do you make sure that you get the right people involved, that the roles are clear, that they are safe, that there's a bit of a plan B if something goes wrong, but how do you do that in a way that doesn't kill those human emotions, the things that people do for each other when they don't feel like they're being told by somebody to do it? They do it because they've got that different kind of relationship. Heather, I was just wondering if I could ask you for your thoughts, and in particular, I think this idea that what you're doing is still quite unusual. There are, the best part of 15,000 people across the UK who are using shared lives. There's another 1,000 people or so involved in home share, but that's still in a country the size of the UK, that's still very small. So what do you think would encourage more people to take models like shared lives more seriously, and would you see it as something that should be offered to more people?
Yes, I have to totally agree. It should be shared more often, because I think if I knew at 16 to 18 that I knew I was going to go to a home, to a loving family, and shared lives has a matching process a bit like the home share that Gretta has and things like that. And of course you're relying on people being matched with the right person, and a bit like what Cormac was saying about being adopted and things like that. I think he was very lucky, because I wish I was at a very young age, because when I was very young and I was put into this home that I was expected, that I knew one minute I would be there for maybe 2 months or maybe 2 years, it was very scary, because I didn't have that chance to make any friends or have that life with a loving, caring family. So to come into shared lives and know that I'm not going anywhere and I'm going to stay with this family until I am ready to move out was a huge relief in a way, because I spent most of my life being a bit part of the parcel is the best way to describe it. And the way that I look at being an ambassador and being in shared lives, I think if my social worker said I didn't know about shared lives, my life would be so much different to what it is now. And I think it's so important for social workers that are working with young people like myself or any other person to let them know it's okay and they're not going to be alone, and there is services like shared lives out there, because I think it's so important. Like, I see it on a day-to-day basis of how it's changed my life, and I've only been here for 4 years. And to think that in another 4 years my life would be so different as well to what I'm sitting now, to have that massive change in my life, to have that family that will never give up on me, no matter if I do move into my own house. And I think things like the cafe as well, you know, that is so important, and I wish there was more cafes like it, because you really do see it.
Fantastic. And that picks up on a couple of comments from the audience, so a couple of questions. So there was a question about uncertainty. We live in these very uncertain times where suddenly it feels like everything can change with the pandemic. And how do we build certainty? And I think that's what we're all saying, is that comes from relationships. You know, relationships are fragile. They don't always, you know, they can be messy. But actually that kind of sense of longevity never really comes from services or from people who are paid to be with us, who will inevitably move around. It comes from relationships that will last, even if, as you say, you know, your circumstances might change. You might be living you know, in your own place at some point, but those relationships will last. And there was a comment from Kerry from the audience, which chimed, I think, with what you were saying, Heather, which was that she'd worked with a young person in residential care who said, I don't want to talk to you because you only want to write down what I say and show it to the inspectors that you're doing your job. And Kerry says, that statement's never left me, and it's inspired me to make real connections and not just tick boxes. And it's that different quality of relationship, I think, that we've always been talking about.
It's quite funny you should say that, because Andrea, who's my foster mum, she always tells me she's going to do a carer's handwritten book for everything that she's been told in her life about that sort of thing that she's been said, like, you know, you're just here to care for me and all that sort of thing. Because when you're in that place that you don't know if you're going to be there 2 years, 2 months, I think it's very scary. And I think as an ambassador, I think if I could go in and be that relatable person to tell them, look at my life and how it's changed, and to be able to get shared lives more out there, I think it's so much important than someone that goes in with a badge and the suit, and it can be very intimidating because you feel you have to tell them what they want to hear, and it's not necessarily what you want or what you need. And I think that's a huge difference.
Yeah, and that's picked up by Mick Ward, who was heavily involved in a senior role in adult social care in Leeds, where I live, but is now has gone through the approval process to become a shared life carer himself. And he says in the chat that he was very aware, as he showed somebody who might be coming to share his home through shared lives around his home, how different that felt compared to when he'd be showing a potential service user around a service that the council managed, because it was much more personal. It wasn't just, there was better biscuits, he says, but also a much more equal relationship as we explored with each other whether this was going to be a good match. And that idea of equality, Clinton, I wonder if I could come to you, and you touched on something that again has come up as a question from the audience around co-production, and I think Cormac, you talked about this as well, that community development work is not always equitable. You know, some of the Cormac, you were sort of talking about how some of the bad things about community or some of the prejudices that people have, you know, are there as not just the strengths. And if co-production, Clinton, is you know, it's partly about people having that meaningful role, about being able to contribute, but it's also about power and about who gets to take responsibility for shaping things. How can we ensure that that all communities and all groups get to take part in that, and that it doesn't just become another way of of embedding different kinds of inequalities. I think you might be on mute, Clinton.
Yeah, sorry. For me, it's about starting the conversation off from the present, that you're not trying to convert someone to your side or convince someone to your side. It's about aiding the understanding of where you are coming from, and but we don't do that, because one of the things that we do around equality is go into that space of identity politics, and sometimes we need to realise that identity isn't fixed, identity is fluid. So understanding that, but also I use an analogy of a lot of people talk about co-production, and I use the analogy of the song. It reminds me of the song by Salt and Pepper, where they talk about, let's talk about sex. I'll tell you why. So co-production is like a teenage sex. Everyone talks about it. Nobody really knows how to do it. Everyone thinks everyone else is doing it. So everyone claims they're doing it. And that's, what it means to me when I hear organisations, and the song in the back of my head is Salt and Pepper. But co-production is a long-term relationship. It's not a one-off thing. It's and that's part of the connection, and belonging and contribution and purpose. And the image I have of co-production is the caterpillar and butterfly, because it takes a long time for the caterpillar to transform into a butterfly, and when it does, and if you think about it, a butterfly that can launch a hurricane, but can also encourage and enable change in all directions. So for me, it's understanding that and trying to understand where people are coming from and their lived experience. And equality, we always start from the point of legislation. I think we forget a big part of equality for me is about our loves, our hopes, our wishes, our dreams, and they shouldn't be blighted because of an identity that you might carry. Because I'm black, I'm disabled, I have multiple long-term conditions. That's all of who I am, and that's part of trying to understand intersectionality.
And for people that aren't familiar with that idea, can you just unpack what that what that means, that sort of intersectionality in our jargon busting kind of mode?
Okay, for intersectionality for me is having more than one identity, and like I say, as a black man, that's two identities, there, as a disabled person, and long-term conditions. They all have identity that either creates stereotypes, which could be either positive or negative, but we meet at the crossroads, and that's what intersectionality is about.
Fantastic, thank you. And Georgie, I think you wanted to come in at this point.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, gosh, so many wonderful stuff coming. I'm start scribbling away. Absolutely. And, this whole thing about a contributive life. Oh, I love that, Clinton. I really, really do. So, yeah, so it's very interesting, the whole issue about co-production. I mean, this is my passion. It really is. It's like, listening to real people with an open heart. Now, the reality is, right, there are two types of designers in the world. You've got Mother Nature, who's designed some bloody good stuff, really amazing. And then you've got man-made design. And actually, to date, it really has been man-made, and everything, communities, the stuff that you're doing at Shared Lives, whether it's a cup, everything has been designed. And invariably, it has been designed by an individual without talking or listening to other people. So actually, the whole process of co-production is just not happening. And one of my absolute, it's my blood boil, is that, 12.5 billion pounds of taxpayers' money has been invested in healthy aging projects, invariably apps, digital kind of stuff, but they haven't actually listened or spoken to real people. So actually what Clinton is talking about, and what your stuff that you're doing at, Shared Lives Matter, is that you are listening with an open heart, with a deep empathy. So really there are two things which need to happen. We need to design with real people, absolutely. We need to co-design, co-collaborate, absolutely. But we need to do it with a really deep, open heart, and that takes a skill. It takes a skill. It's like you don't go to a dentist who is just, who thinks he could be a dentist. We need to develop and help people become really good designers. And that is my biggest bugbear and my biggest passion. And when you do that, to teach people how to listen, to share, to hear the stories, the positive, the joys, as well as, you're right, Cormac, the suffering. Then you create a trust. And once you've got trust, people are more vulnerable. Then you can really hear what the issues are, and then you can design better. And until we can do that, we're going to be remaining stuck. And none of us want to do that. So this is why this conversation around co-creation, hearing real stories about joy, creating safe places, equality, these are things that are really, really, really critical in how we create connection. And there's one final thing I would like to say is the language that we use. Is that there is too much talk about loneliness and isolation. If we just focus on loneliness and isolation, that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. We will just fix loneliness and isolation. But what we want to do, we want to create deep connection. So for me, I avoid using loneliness. The opposite to loneliness is connectivity. So actually, if we can focus on how can we build connections, that's where our mind and our heart goes. So that's my little moment. But yes, but Clinton, thank you. Co-production is absolutely key.
Thanks, Georgie. Gretta, were you wanting to come in? You're on mute at the moment. So I don't know if you are able to take yourself off mute. Yes. We can hear you, Gretta.
I'm alive now. Yes.
Yeah, we can hear you.
What would you like? What's your question?
So one of the things that Georgie was just talking about was that we often focus on loneliness and isolation when really, actually, we should be focusing on connection. And one of the things that strikes me about how we've tried to talk about home share with our home share members is we used to say, this could be for you if you're lonely and if you're isolated and you can't get the help you need. And we often now talk about it as being something which is a way for an older person to give somebody else either a start in life or to contribute. And I wondered, it sounded from your story that this is something that's helped you, but also something where you've been helping Rick as well. And I know Rick's had to leave us a few moments ago. But do you feel like that home share has that kind of two-way street, I guess, of helping each other?
Oh yes, absolutely. I mean, I was lonely. As I said, I'd been on my own for 25 years, and the family had moved away, and I was really, and I realized now that my whole life was disintegrating slowly and surely. The gardening wasn't getting done. I wasn't cooking properly for myself. I wasn't caring for myself. Although I have friends, they're not there at 6 and 7, 8 o'clock at night. And so for me, it's been a tremendous experience. Quite blessed. I've given talks to my local church and been on local press. And so trying to pass the word around and help others. That's my great feeling that I'd like to do, is help others in similar situations to be blessed as I've been blessed.
Brilliant. And I think we can see from comments from the audience that you certainly reached lots of people, and there'll be converts here today. Thank you, Gretta. Cormac.
I have to leave now. Excuse me.
No worries. Take care.
Bless you all.
Yeah.
Bye.
Look after yourself. Take care now. Bye-bye. Cormac, did you want to come in at this point?
I was just reflecting there that, Alex, one of the great challenges in our work, if what we're trying to do is create meaningful shared space, is to recognize that can be contested. So that sometimes that can be contested by the need to withdraw, perhaps, and just to move very much into private space for various reasons, sometimes very good reasons. But it can also be contested by those that want to manage the situation. They never say, I want to manage you, I want you to be a custodian, I want to institution. Never say that. It's always said while wearing the mask of love. So it's said in the spirit of safeguarding, risk avoidance, caring for you, telling you what you need. So the narrative is always, you're needy, but don't worry, because I'm here to help you. And for me, I think that's done with good intent. So I don't want to dismiss that, but I do want to acknowledge that it's in the conversation sometimes. And so I think the work that you're doing at Shared Lives is contested. And it's contested by those who might say, well, actually, I believe I can live completely independently. I don't think you can. And I don't want to be disrespectful, but I don't think anybody can be completely independent. I think independence comes from interdependence. But I get why, maybe through trauma or just through personal choice sometimes, that would be a legitimate choice. But I guess for a lot of people, and maybe it even takes time for that awareness to emerge, that kind of sense of I am somebody and I am needed gives them a real possibility or entry point into a shared life. It says, you're not just going to be seen as a bundle of needs that we're going to manage and cope with and maybe even turn into a job, right? We're going to commodify. But you have a gift. You have a contribution. You have things you know. You have passions that we want to share. And we can't do community life without you. And I think that's a really, really important message that you're sending out through Shared Lives. And you're doing that in a way that's thoughtful and intentional. So the naysayers that say, hold on a second, no, clearly this person can't be allowed to have a shared life. No. Bring them over here into managed space. Or let's send them into personal space. I think what you're doing is you're responding in a very thoughtful way and saying, let's do this in a way that's manageable, in a way that's respectful of personal choice, in the way that's safe. But I think what I love about your thoughtfulness is that it doesn't just stop with the person and the family. I mean, Heather's story, I love because it's a story about family, self, and community, her coffee shop. So here her gifts are spread out into the community. And I can just feel that sense. I remember, if I may just briefly say this, I remember many years ago walking up along a street in Cheltenham and encountering a very unusual place, a militaria shop, which is essentially a place that sells all kinds of military stuff, swords, maps, all of that kind of stuff. I don't actually think the guy sold anything. I mean, in the sense of there was no passing trade. So he did all, I guess, online trading with collectors. But here was this little gem of a place where hundreds, actually, over a week, hundreds of retired military men would go and they would meet and they'd get together and they'd have a cup of tea and they'd kind of talk about whatever they reminisced around. We're getting a bit of background noise.
Yeah, everyone can mute yourselves. We'll, if we're not already. Yeah, we can still hear you though, Cormac.
Okay, and it really struck me that this gentleman, Steve, who on the face of it was running a shop, he was a local business person. You wouldn't think of him as somebody who was alongside in a very meaningful way older people. But, when you go into the shop, and a militaria shop, who'd think that a militaria shop was a place that hosts associational life for retired military men in Cheltenham? Like, this is not a place I think most social workers would put on the map. They wouldn't even know. So it's really interesting to me that Steve and that military shop and those men and their association life is not on the map, but it is in the territory. So care is in the territory, but it's often not on the map of the designer, on the procurement officer, on the commissioner, on the professional. But that's changing, and that's really exciting. It's on your map. It's on Shared Lives maps. Increasingly, I think, we're coming to be aware that actually the question isn't how do we make our services better from inside out, but how do we get curious about what are the community alternatives out there? So kind of pivoting away from how do we deliver better to how do we discover more in what is within the person and what surrounds them, and then connect. And after that, we can supplement, because services are important, and resources and technology, they're all great gifts of the modern age. We don't want to in any way dismiss them, but we want them to be in right relationship. So I think at the heart of what we're trying to talk about here is how shared lives is at the core of meaningful existence. And around that, there can always be a bit of managed stuff that's very, very helpful. And I think that's an exciting conversation to be part of.
Definitely, and I think I like that idea of this being contested. I think that's something we're really comfortable with. I used to have a Twitter conversation with a gentleman who was a wheelchair user and was living independently with support from personal assistants that were his employees, and he was horrified by the idea of shared lives because it wasn't for him. It wasn't the life he was looking for, and I think whether it's shared lives, home share, or any of the, or family by family, or any of the other models, it's not about imposing one model on other people, and I think probably recognizing that people are looking for different things at different stages of their life as well. But for me, that idea of these ideas being contested feels healthy. That you know, there should be that kind of that discussion and that debate, and we should always be open to the idea that we might be doing things wrong as well. We started our conference with Mike Clark and Equality, Diversity, Inclusion Lead, talking about the dangers of groupthink and how we need diversity of thought, people's backgrounds, people's different kinds of expertise if we're going to avoid that. I think that's very true. And it's also struck, there's something here I think about how our services, our public services, can often be all or nothing. So we're both very good at keeping people out of public services, and you know, they're all sort of hoops that people have to jump through. But then if you've managed to get into public services, we can be very good at keeping them inside public services as well. And I think the power of the work that we've been hearing about today is it does exist on the edges. It exists on those boundaries between what things that people would recognize as a service and things that people think of as family and community. And why should we have to choose between the two? Why can't we have the good things that come from all of those? We are just about out of time, coming up to the end of our session. So I can see that we've just had a late flurry of questions, but I don't think we're going to have time to answer them. But perhaps people could keep that conversation going in the chat and on social media afterwards. So what I'll do is just end by thanking our incredible panel. So Heather, Cormac, Georgie, Clinton. We haven't got Rick and Gretta with us, but they were brilliant. And thanks to my colleagues who've organised this session as well. It's been a real pleasure to share this discussion with you. So huge thanks to you all, and thanks for supporting our work and for continuing this conversation. Thanks everybody.